Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you all about how to modify an original Game Boy Advance with a screen from a Game Boy Advance SP. And specifically for this video, we'll be using a screen from a Game Boy Advance SP model AGS-101. And the reason for that is because that is the brightest screen that was ever put out on a Game Boy Advance. It's not necessarily the best screen, but it is the absolute brightest that was ever released by Nintendo. And so this is a pretty popular mod that a lot of people have been doing in the retro community and the Game Boy community for several years. One of the things that you always see though is people asking why you would do this. Why not just use an original Game Boy Advance without any mods, or why not use just a regular Game Boy Advance SP? And so I decided to do this mod after having played with my original Game Boy Advance for about 5 minutes. Like, that's all it took me to be like, you know what, I should probably improve on this thing. I've never been much of a handheld guy. The first real handheld that I got into was the Nintendo Switch. And I've had so much fun with the Nintendo Switch that it made me interested in more of like the older handhelds, because I am like a retro game kind of guy. So I was like, I wonder what hidden gems, what great games I've missed on the handheld market way back in the day, because I've never really been a handheld guy. I had an original Game Boy way back in the day, but that was pretty much it. So I bought this Game Boy Advance, and I was intending to play these games on the Game Boy Advance, and the first game that I tried out was actually Mario Kart, and the screen, it's so bad. It's the kind of thing where I did have an original Game Boy for a brief period as a kid, and I was just kind of used to it at that point. But in the modern age, when you have great screens like the one on the Nintendo Switch or on like your iPhone or Android phone or whatever, it's like you're used to the screens actually working and looking good, while on this you literally can't see anything. Like, you're tilting it in the light. I mean, if you own a Game Boy Advance, this is not news to you, but for those who don't, or if you haven't played one in like 10 plus years, it's really rough to go back to. And now Nintendo eventually did fix this lighting problem with the Game Boy Advance SP. The first few were actually front lit, and then eventually they switched to backlit, which is the best way to do it in my opinion. And I did actually play a little bit of Game Boy Advance on the Game Boy Advance SP as a kid. One of my best friends back in the day, Simon, he had one, and he lent me one with his copy of Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories to try out the game, because I was a huge Kingdom Hearts fan back in the day. And even back then, I found the Game Boy Advance SP to be incredibly uncomfortable to hold. Like, it would dig into my hands, like those corners. I know they're rounded, but they would still dig into my hands. And because it's so like cramped up, my hands would cramp if I was playing for more than like 20-30 minutes. And now, as like a normal sized adult who has relatively big hands, it's really difficult. Like, I can't play it for more than 5-10 minutes without my hands cramping. Like, I would compare the Game Boy Advance SP kind of to like an NES controller, in that it's very square and it just kind of digs in. While the original model, the original Game Boy Advance, is a lot more like a Super Nintendo controller, in that it's very comfortable, it's very form-fitting, and it works very well. So basically what I want, and what a lot of other people want, is the best of both worlds. The very nice design of the original Game Boy Advance, and the very nice screen of the Game Boy Advance SP. So how you do this is you swap out the screens. You take a screen from a Game Boy Advance SP, and you put it into the original model. And obviously you want to use the AGS-101 because that's the brightest screen. And one thing to note is that an original model Game Boy Advance like this one, there's no brightness button, so whatever brightness the screen is at default, that's what you're stuck with. On the Advance SP, there was actually a button to turn the brightness up. You don't have that on these. So there's much more detailed videos on how to do this on YouTube, but I'm going to show a very brief overview here, just kind of a quick guide, show you what you're in for, and show you kind of like the before and after. So just as a baseline here, this is what the screen on the Game Boy Advance looked like before, without any mods whatsoever. So we're just going to jump right into the tutorial here, and I'll kind of walk you through it a little bit. And one thing to note is that you don't have to actually have a Game Boy Advance SP and rip it open to swap out the screens. For example, the screen that I will be using here, I bought from a vendor on eBay, and there's a lot of people who sell these AGS-101 screens. Like, there's tons out there, so if you want one, you can buy it. It always comes with a little kit with a few other little things like some screwdrivers and a new screen protector and everything. And being able to tell which screen you need for when you're going to buy it is actually very easy. If you take out the batteries, there's a little slot that you can see right up here, and it has a number inside. If the series of numbers begins with a 1 like mine, then you need to get the 32-pin connector version. If it begins with a 0, which is not the one that I have, then you need to get a 40-pin connector version. Now the next step is going to be taking out all of the screws from your Game Boy Advance. Most of them are actually this tri-wing style that Nintendo uses for a lot of their Game Boy products. And there are a couple standard Phillips as well. So at this point you should be able to open it up without too much trouble, and now you should actually be looking at the board. And now you need to remove the cable actually connecting the original screen to the board itself. First, start up by pushing these little tabs on either side. I suggest a very tiny flathead screwdriver, and then you just need to pull the ribbon cable out itself. And the easiest way to get the actual ribbon cable out is to just slide a very small screwdriver underneath and just pry gently. That way you don't damage anything and you don't have to worry about it. And now you're going to want to remove the screws that actually hold the board down to the front of the Game Boy Advance. And now at this point, it's time to actually lift the board out of the Game Boy Advance and set it to the side. And then you're going to want to remove the conductive pads and any buttons and anything that can really fall out at this point. And now you need to actually remove the original screen from the Game Boy Advance. And because it's well glued in there, the easiest way to do this is to just actually twist the front frame of the Game Boy Advance back and forth until the screen starts to lift up, and then you can kind of get your finger or get a tool under there and kind of pry upwards. And now at this point you can pretty much just lift the screen right out. There's a black sticky glue rim that might try and come out with it, but that just gets pulled off as well. And now this is actually the point where you're able to easily pop out the front screen protector of the Game Boy Advance and swap in a new one if you want to. And now here's the new backlit screen from an AGS-101 that I purchased. What you're going to want to do is actually stick this into the screen spot on the Game Boy Advance, and you'll notice that it's actually a little bit too big at the bottom. And so then what you want to do is get a pen or a marker and make a little line all around the screen wherever it's interfering with the plastic, like wherever it's sitting on top of the plastic that held in the old screen. And then you're going to want to grab an X-Acto knife, and I actually suggest use a smaller one than I used here, but I mean, this is what I had to work with. And you're going to want to file away and strip away the plastic that interferes with where the screen will be. And I actually found that having a pair of pliers to kind of wiggle out the little plastic chunks made things go a lot easier and a lot smoother, so it might be worth looking into. So when all that's said and done, be sure to clear away any little plastic chunks or pieces that might be sticking around, and make sure that everything is flush, or as flush as you can possibly get it. And now it's time to attach your new screen to this little connector that's going to attach to the original board. Now put the new shiny screen into the Game Boy Advance, and this is obviously a good time to make sure that it fits perfectly if you hadn't checked that already. And now you're going to have to bend the ribbon cable up and tape it down to the back of the screen to make sure that it lines up correctly with the board where you're going to have to actually plug it in. And this actually took me a couple tries to get perfect. What you're supposed to do is line up the little beige piece where the ribbon connectors plug into each other with the D-pad, but again, this might take a little bit of trial and error like it did for me to get it perfect. And now you should put back in those buttons, those conductive pads, everything, because you're about to put the board back into the Game Boy Advance. When you've done all that, you can screw the board back down and then plug the cable from the new screen into where the old one plugged in. And now you're going to need to solder the wire from the new screen to a specific place on the right-hand side of the board. I've zoomed in and highlighted it right here, so hopefully it's as easy to find as possible, but it has to be this exact place. And I will say that this is a very tiny connection, and you don't want it to hit any of the connections to the side, or that could cause some problems like a short. So it was actually a little bit more difficult than I was expecting, although it is manageable, and if you have professional tools, unlike what I was using, it shouldn't be that hard. A trick that I found and that I have used when soldering electronics before is to cover all the surrounding parts that you don't want to hit with tape or some other material that the solder will not stick to. That way, if you do accidentally drop a little bit too much or it goes a little bit crazy, it won't actually hit anything you don't want it to. That's just a little small trick that I found if you have problems with this or if you're worried. And the easiest way that I have found to do this is actually just heat up a little bit of solder, get it boiling hot to where it's melting, and drop it directly onto that point and make sure it fuses. Then get a little bit more solder going and then push the wire onto that point that you dropped onto the board with the new solder and melt it in. Give the wire a very gentle tug to make sure it's firmly soldered in there and it's not going to come loose, and you're pretty much good. If you use my tape trick, make sure to remove all that, and then you can reassemble your Game Boy and test it out. It's probably worth noting that I hadn't fully reassembled my Game Boy Advance at this point in case there was some unforeseen problems, which is why I had to turn it on with this screwdriver here. But if you're confident in your work, you can fully reassemble it at this point. As you can see, the screen is now lit up. Make sure you use your best game here to test this thing out and make sure that there's no issues whatsoever. And it should be looking pretty good, kind of like how mine does. Alright guys, and there you have it. My Game Boy Advance is now modded with an AGS-101 screen. The picture quality is amazing. It's so much better than it was. Like, I'm actually excited to sit down and play this thing, kind of like my Nintendo Switch, as opposed to being like, ugh, God, and trying to tilt it, or fuck, if you try and play it in the dark, you're screwed. Like, there was no way before. Now I can actually lie in bed and play Mario Kart or Minish Cap or, you know, whatever I want to play. Shrek 3. So as you can see here in these images, it is so much brighter, so much better than it was. Like, the mod itself was not particularly complicated. I only had to solder one wire in the entire thing, and I'm not great at soldering, but even I was able to do it. It's a very small point that you have to solder to, but if you have basic soldering skills, or you know somebody who has those skills, you can pull it off. And I really do feel like this mod gives you the best of both worlds. You get the nice form-fitting shape of the original model with really good shoulder buttons, by the way, because I always found the Advance SP had terrible shoulder buttons. And you get that nice bright screen of the Advance SP into your original so you can see to play. It works great. And one of my concerns with this thing, by the way, was that it might not work, or there might be some issues if I used it with the Game Boy player on my GameCube, but it works perfectly just how it used to before. There's no issues whatsoever, so don't worry about it. And if you're worried about battery life, apparently there have been tests run, and having a lit up screen like this in a Game Boy Advance, it only drains the battery about 10% faster. So I think that's well worth it, at least in my opinion. And as you can see here, it looks great. It works well. There's really no problems with it at all. It was a relatively easy mod, especially compared to some of the stuff I did, and really I'm just super happy with this. Like, I can't wait to just play more of this easily now without having to like search for the perfect light source and angle it so that I'm not actually getting reflection. Like, all you actual Game Boy owners, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So yeah guys, that pretty much wraps up this video. I mean, I'm very happy with the mod. It was quite easy to do. If it's something you're interested in yourself, I would highly recommend it. It doesn't take very much skill to pull off, and in the end you're gonna get a really great end result. So yeah guys, thanks a lot for watching. If you have any questions, definitely let me know down in the comments below, and as always, I will see you guys in the next one. Hey guys, my name is Rob Noire, and today I have a video for you all about the N64. Now, if you know me, if you know the channel, if you've watched for a while, which was released last year by the company Analog, and which is widely considered to be the best possible way to play original NES cartridges in HD.